Great, thank you very much indeed, and huge congratulations to all of you. I look forward to working with you over the years as new fellows, so that's fantastic, thank you. Now, it's now a huge pleasure for me to introduce to you our keynote speaker, Professor Dame Sally Davies. I spoke to Dame Sally just before this afternoon because I've got 2 pages of introduction for Dame Sally that are in your programme, and it's a hugely impressive CV, and Dame Sally said exactly what I wanted her to, for those of you that wouldn't have said this. She said, oh, you'll definitely want to shorten that. So please do look at the rest of Dame Sally's CV because it is hugely worth reading. But Dame Sally is the UK Special Envoy on Antimicrobial Resistance. Before this, she was the Chief Medical Officer for England and Chief Medical Advisor to the UK government from March 2011 to September 2019, having held the post on an interim basis since June 2010. Dame Sally is a Fellow of the Royal Society, advocates globally on antimicrobial resistance, and is a leading figure in global health. Dame Sally, we're delighted to have you here.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you, President, for this invitation. I am honoured. So, think back a few years, and I was made the Chief Medical Officer. That's about human health. And I had to write, it's statutory, an annual report on the state of the nation's health. So I thought, I'm going to do it differently from my predecessor who wrote a monograph. I'm going to get the experts to actually write the chapter. But let's start with something that isn't contentious. Let's start with infection. We had a workshop with the experts. They went and wrote their chapters. We came back as a workshop to discuss what my chapter was going to say about the need for policy interventions. And I sat there listening to all these experts, and I said, so, this was 2013, since I gave up looking after patients in 2006, antimicrobial resistance, superbugs, are going up and up. Yet, the pipeline's empty. So guys, because most of them were men, what have you done about this? And they all said, well, we keep telling people. And I said, yes. Telling people doesn't seem to be cracking it. So I started on a journey to give voice to this. But the deal was that you and everyone recognise I'm not a technical expert. You are the technical experts. I do the advocacy, understand policy and how things fit together, and between us, we move the world. Fast forward a bit, and I was substantive CMO, and I looked at my diary and said, who's this woman coming to see me? It's the chief exec of the National Farmers Association. So she walks in, and I said, very nice to meet you, but I think you should be seeing the chief vet. I do humans. And she said, no, I have come to see you. I've come to see you to say thank you. You recognise that we need food security and that appropriate use of antibiotics is right, and you've been singing our praises around the world, which is true. I do sing your praises around the world. In fact, the most recent case was in Luxembourg 10 days ago. We had a formal government-to-government meeting between the US, top of their government, Santé, top of the Commission, Britain and Norway, because we're not in the EU, and I did the British presentation, the only presentation that got a clap. Why did it get a clap? Because everyone in Britain is making a move, including farmers and vets. Of course, we could all do more, and perhaps we're going to talk about that. Along the way, I had to be taught the difference between vets who looked after small animals, large animals, and those who worked on the food chain in abattoirs, and I've learned a lot. If I make mistakes, just in the questions, don't berate me, teach me, because that way we'll get there. What has, for me, been particularly interesting about this journey with the vets and the food chain is actually how you've done it voluntarily. Pete Borriello told me you would, and I said, oh, come on, I'm going to fight for regulation. You won't be able to. But you have. So what I'm going to take you through is where we are kind of globally, and how it fits in the hope that you'll help by going on improving what you're doing bit by bit. The last bit's always more difficult than the early bit, and I bet there are some who've done a wonderful job and some laggards, and somehow we've got to pull those laggards with us. It's always more difficult. But also you have interactions globally, across Europe, other places. You can help. You can help on what we as Britain are doing as a group. Red is next. Funny, I didn't think red was usually next. So what I started on was to prove that this mattered. I was a bit shaken by how much it matters. I persuaded the Wellcome Trust and the Gates Foundation to join with the Department of Health and fund a global burden of disease study in humans. We don't have one in animals. Should we? I leave that question open to you. And what we discovered, as you can see here, and yes, it is a laser, is while it is not, it's the 12th most important cause of death overall, directly, if you look at people who die who happen to have associated AMR, you see it becomes the 3rd most important cause of death across the world, after heart disease and stroke. That's really important. And in fact, the deaths of AMR directly are more than each of HIV and AIDS, TB and malaria. So doesn't that kind of say, why are we not taking this more seriously? I think that I've been getting it wrong for a few years by talking about a silent pandemic. Politicians and people discount something that's silent. So I've stopped talking about it being silent. I talk about a grand pandemic because it threatens human security, it threatens food security and environmental security. And actually, if you look at this data in more detail, you'll find that children bear the brunt. 1 in 5 of the deaths is children under the age of 5. It's worst in low-income countries. But it's also, and if, I think I've got some data in later to show you, the further north you go in Europe, the less antibiotics used. One Health, doesn't matter where. The further south you go, the more are used, the more AMR there is. Meanwhile, we're getting lots of new studies, and I'm going to mention a few as we go through. The most recent I'm going to mention is one from August. Increasing levels of air pollution correlate directly with increasing levels of AMR. Almost 500,000 premature deaths in 2018 were linked to AMR, potentially from air pollution. And in fact, this study shows that PM 2.5, the tiny particles, contributed to AMR more than antibiotic use or even access to drinking water services. I think they're taking a bit too far, but it's interesting that it may be that pollution plays a role in this. It's so complex, like climate change. And indeed, if you look at rivers, this is a sample of over 200 rivers across the world, and you can see pollution, and you can also see the direct relationship with low-income countries. Middle income can be even worse, whereas high-income countries, it's not so bad. I hate to tell you that Glasgow is the worst in Britain, but Madrid is worse. And you can begin to see why this is in China, and you can see the effluent just coming out of some laboratories, from manufacturing. You can get it from runoff from not only factories, but high-use hospitals and places. And we begin to see microplastics in the environment harbouring biofilms with AMR, and actually sea animals who've got AMR when, of course, they never had any antibiotics. And so this is, I think, getting very scary. And I'm very concerned about the stories we're now getting in Britain over the last year or two of our own sewage not being up to standard and a release of sewage directly out. But, and I don't know whether bees count for vets. I don't know who looks after their illness. It's not just water and things like that. A new study found that 80% of sampled bees were positive for AMR. That's a bit worrying. But they may be a useful proxy for the environmental contamination, of course, because of how they interact with pollen and plants, dust, air and water and everything. So, to give you some of the global stuff, across the world, antibiotic use in food-producing animals is decreasing. Overall, on the animal side, and this is global, we'll come back to your work, which is excellent, but please do more. We've seen overall a decrease of 13% in the use of antibiotics for food-producing animals between 2017 and 19, so over 2 years. Of course, this is skewed by the fact that not all countries put their data in. 1/3 don't, and also skewed by the fact that we know that as you get development, they use more in humans because they get more access, so they use more, and generally they want more meat, so they're using generally more in the animal sector. As of 2021, the use of antimicrobial agents in animals for growth promotion is said not to be a practice in nearly 3/4 of countries, which is good progress if it's true. Now, I know we don't use growth promotion, and it was outlawed in the EU in, I think it was 2006. But of course, if the further south you go in Europe, the higher the use per kilo of protein. And it's interesting how many southern European countries have moved from growth promotion to metaphylaxis and prophylaxis. But it is an improvement. Colistin is one of our highest priority, critically important antimicrobials for use in humans, and we know that though China has banned its use in their own food production, they still manufacture it for export for use in food production elsewhere, and we know of at least 4 countries that use it. And I'm not yet, maybe I shouldn't say this, you may be transmitting this online, I'm not yet convinced that China's stopped using it. And that food chain element is terribly important because food security depends on animal health, you know that, but also more than 60% of human pathogens are of animal origin, including, of course, COVID-19. So if we look at this in the wrong way, then we're risking everything as we go forward. And food security impacts every corner of the world. I get very worried about the trade things that governments are signing because of 2 things. One, I want a level playing field, our farmers and farmers producing abroad. But 2, if we don't have growth promotion and we don't have hormones and we have other standards, I want them applied to what we import. Partly level playing field, partly human health, partly how else are we going to get some of these countries improving what they offer and everything, let alone fairness. In Indonesia, and we do import chickens from there, more than 50% of E. coli bacteria isolated from broiler chickens no longer respond to available antibiotics. And this one's even more shocking. A study in Australian supermarkets, 55% of beef samples and 39% of salmon samples were harbouring resistance to commonly used antibiotics only last year. So this is a problem, and those of you in abattoirs or who work with the food processing sector really can help up standards and work with the Food Standards Agency on their surveillance, of course. It used to be called the organisation OIE for Animal Health. They renamed themselves to the WHY, the World Organization for Animal Health. I don't know. So their slides often say WOA, formerly known as OIE. So I don't think they simplified it, but I think they do rather nice work. And here is the data I've just shown you of it dropping, but plateauing. So let's hope that goes on. Now, I do know it's illegal in this country, and I do believe that we don't have growth promotion here. But I think it's interesting for you to see what's happening across the world. And you can see there are countries where they definitely do use growth promotion. And so one would guess this proportion don't, and what are the rest of them doing? Is it truly gone, or are they hiding behind something else? So you might think about that and think how you can help us get the word out there that it can be done. And it's important to focus on trying to use antibiotics appropriately because AMR is a threat to the global economy and productivity. This is a World Bank study. You don't really have to look at it, but it makes me talk about it. But they essentially reckon that by 2050, if we don't mitigate this well and take action, the impact on GDP will be somewhere between 1.1% and 3.8%. But the big issue that it is that it will impact low-income countries much more than the high-income countries. Look at that. So this is a real risk for poverty and deaths. And it'll have such disproportionate consequences. It'll drive an extra 28 million people into extreme poverty. And there's a new Canadian study out, and they reckon it's already hitting their GDP. We work with FAIR, you may know them, an NGO focused on protein supply chains, and they reckon that over 70% of the world's largest meat, fish and dairy companies, worth nearly $340 trillion, are ranked as high risk for antibiotic stewardship. Surely we, as leaders in this, can help improve this. And you know, we have to do something because otherwise our healthcare systems are going to fall over of this. Another bit that we worry about are the Sustainable Development Goals. They were signed up to under the Cameron government because he was on one of the committees. They, at the UN, all countries agreed to hit them by 2030. We're quite a way off. Now, this actually matters, and this is where AMR is impacting on lots of them. Big one here for all of you and your global colleagues about untreatable infections and food sustainability. Of course, I come from the human side. I've mentioned the water side. I could rabbit on forever about aquaculture, as I've learned to call it, fish farming. I've been to Hong Kong. I've seen fish farms. They tip antibiotics into the water of the fish farms. It looks filthy. You can go all around Asia. As you will know, the protein that's going up at the moment in production and consumption is fish, going up like that, antibiotic use going with it. Whereas salmon and trout farming in Norway and in Scotland, they use a mixture of 3 vaccines, no antibiotics. It's doing really well. So fish farming is somewhere where vets have made a big difference in 2 species, though Chile has not managed to deliver with using the vaccines. The Norwegians tell me that's because they have a leaky system, but I don't know. I leave the rest of it for you to think about. I was in New York for the United Nations General Assembly high-level meetings in September, and we really did get lots of countries saying, we've got a high-level meeting next year on AMR, we need to do something. So let's just think a bit about the global response. In 2010, you see, now OIE, FAO, Food and Agriculture Organization, and WHO, 2 members of the UN, plus this membership organization, World Organization for Animal Health, came together as a tripartite to work together on AMR. We, and there was real British leadership in this, made sure that there was a global action plan on AMR that was endorsed not only by the World Health Assembly, but actually by FAO. I still remember the diplomat in Rome at the FAO ringing me up in the middle of the World Health Assembly saying, I don't think the FAO are going to agree the global action plan. And I said, see if you can just delay till we've voted on it. He did, and then he went back to them, got it back on the floor of their big assembly and said, WHO's voted on it, why don't we? We had a high-level meeting in 2016, which kind of got much more awareness and much more activity. The World Health Organization with the others set up a multi-partner trust fund, but apart from the Brits, Germans, Netherlands and Sweden, no one gave money, but to support national action plans. And we're busy moving forward, having brought in the UN Environment Programme to a high-level meeting in 24 September. So I'm busy working to try and get that to give political momentum, which also means innovation, money joined up and things to it. But we do have a big problem. The governance is pretty poor across the world. If you look at that, dark is better governance, and you can see that there's plenty of places with lousy governance, and in general, the governance poorness is quite closely related to the levels of AMR that are reported. I, following the 2016 high-level meeting, was asked to serve on an interagency coordination panel. You can see me here in, I think, about 2016, presenting the report to the Secretary General of the UN, who was looking young then. He doesn't any longer. And we asked for all of these things. We do have a global leaders group. I sit on it to do advocacy. But really, it is doing some advocacy, but it's not delivering much. 10 days ago in Rome, the FAO launched a multi-stakeholder partnership platform. Britain was represented by our chief vet, Christine Middlemas, who's chairing one of the committees on that. What we haven't got, which many of us believe fervently we need, is an independent panel for science, a bit like the IPCC for climate. If you think about this, it's as complex as climate. It's as impactful because humans are doing it to ourselves in the sense with misuse of antibiotics and everything, but it impacts, you talk about One Health, animals, the food chain, fish, the water, humans, you think about it. I didn't tell you about the recent French study that showed that clouds pour rain with AMR down, and they have more AMR to pour down if they went over pastures and places where there was animal farming. This is inextricably linked. So we need both the science collating for us and the independence of a panel making a noise about it on a regular basis. We haven't won that one yet. Well, we have got this global leaders group, which I mentioned. Most wonderful leader, I don't know if you watch climate change, but Mia Mottley, the Prime Minister of Barbados, is a force of nature. She stands up in COP and says it as it is, coming from Barbados, and she is rather wonderful. I'm somewhere there, I think. Yes, I'm there. And these are our advocacy priorities. Far too many, far too wishy-washy, but making a bit of a difference. But this is a problem with the UN, that it has become too much talk and not enough action. I did manage, when we had the presidency of the G7, to up AMR into the discussions. It had been for a few years in the discussions of health ministers, but we actually managed to get it into climate and environment ministries talking about manufacturing standards, and into finance ministries looking at why we had an empty antibiotic pipeline and what needed doing. And that continues the work in all of those. Interesting that I didn't manage to get it into the animal ministries, whether it's DEFRA or something else, in the same way. It has proved much, much more difficult. And I do like the fact that our government works across all ministries pretty well. So let me just, because we are a world first and it's really rather interesting, talk to you about what we've been doing in this novel reimbursement. So what we have is an empty pipeline of new antibiotics for humans, animals, doesn't matter what. And the reason is that we have what's called a market failure for two reasons. The first is that most antibiotics are off patent. So there's been a race to the bottom in what we pay for them, and they really are very cheap. That has given us a cultural desire to spend nothing on antibiotics. So while in the human side we will spend tens of thousands on a cancer drug to make someone live an extra 3 to 6 months, we're not prepared to pay the same amount for a child with sepsis and a resistant infection to save their life for decades. It's a cultural issue. So it's empty, the pipeline, because what farmers say, why would we develop new ones? We won't get back the money we put into R&D. And they won't, because normally the model is you either make something like a cancer drug and charge a bomb, or you make something for a chronic disease, say high blood pressure, diabetes. You're all in this business with your animals. And they may make a tiny profit on the medicine for that disease, but my golly, lots of people or animals need it day in, day out for the rest of their lives. So in the end, the tiny profit builds up to a blockbuster. Antibiotics won't give you a blockbuster in that way either, because actually, the chief vet and I, if we get new antibiotics, will want to say they're a fire extinguisher. Let's put them in the cupboard and only use them if there's a fire. So they won't sell many at all. So you can see why we have this dreadful market failure across the world. We don't pay enough, and you can't pile them high and sell them cheap because the resistance will arise and then it'll be done. So we have put in place, and I don't think this slide really shows it terribly well, so I'll describe it. We piloted two drugs, two antibiotics, and essentially they were assessed as we normally assess a drug. What's the impact on the human in terms of healthy life years and life expectancy that you get? And then looking at it as a fire extinguisher, as a prevention that will rescue not only a patient, but the transmission to the family, to the ward, to the hospital, to the community, the value there. And we came up with values and then debated with, through that with the companies and agreed to pay a subscription, initially for 3 but extendable to 10 years, of 10 million for each drug each year. So they've signed up, we pay them 10 million for each drug each year, however little or much we use. So we can steward the antibiotics as we use them, but they know they're going to get a set amount of money, so they don't have to worry that they haven't sold it and they're not sending people out to say, use my drug, it's the best, use my drug, it works. It's so successful that the NHS has simplified the societal evaluation and is going to go forward and use it regularly for antibiotics and anti-infectives and bring more in. Japan has said it'll try a trial. Germany is paying more now for its new antibiotics. Sweden has a similar system, but it's aimed at access. So we're really trying to kickstart the whole world and bring them together. Our 10 million per drug over 10 years is calculated as our fair share based on the GDP of the G7 countries. So that's our subscription model that we often nickname the Netflix model. It's like that. I pay a subscription, I watch when I need to or want to. I find it so soporific, the last one I watched. When I want to, and I don't pay more at each one. And it is successful. And the companies say, if all the G7 come back into it, we will start to do the R&D and look for new antibiotics again. And the science is doable. That's called a pull mechanism, if you hear about it. Other people have been funding, including our government, push mechanisms. That's research at the beginning stage. What's the target? How can you interact with the target? How can you make it? So I think I mentioned that I was in Luxembourg. at this, the Transatlantic Task Force. That's the head of the US AMR work. Behind her somewhere is, I think it's there, she's there, is the woman who leads the White House AMR work, DG Santé, you know, all talking about how to work together, how to make the most of the high-level meeting next year. But the reason for showing you that is when I gave a presentation on the UK and where we were, I talked about your data, and I talked about the UK as a One Health issue. Am I going to get the data right? Since 2014, a reduction in critically important antibiotics by 82%. Great. Little way to go, but great. Since 2014, a reduction of antibiotics in food-producing animals use by 50, I'm very bad at numbers, 57% and 9% in the last couple of years. That's good. Poultry's done phenomenally using vaccines. Beef and pork a bit behind, but beginning to get there. Please keep it up. It's fantastic. I got a clap from every other country. No one else got a clap because they couldn't believe how much we were all each doing in our different sectors and bringing it together, working. And then the VMD, Veterinary Medicines Directorate, people said, you presented our data and you said you were proud of us. I'm proud of all of you, even though we have further to go. We work abroad. I persuaded George Osborne to give us a lot of official developments funding, Overseas Development Aid, ODA, for the Fleming Fund. It's One Health. The objective is to help low and middle income countries develop their laboratories and their data so they can take action. In Bangladesh, we're helping them build a mobile app for vets in the field to optimize prescription practices for poultry, giving them expert advice, and we think they say they'll get other countries to use it. Interestingly, in South Africa, we helped them develop genomics expertise, and that was what they pivoted to use to find the beta COVID-19 variant that get them in so much trouble, but it was this that helped. And in the first phase, we've supported 240 labs, over 25,000 training attendances and 150 fellows. So that we were, judged successful, and in August, the ministers gave us another 210 million to keep going on this fund, which is fantastic because that's more labs around the place. Out of this, we also funded, I should know where the labs are, but one of the VMD labs to become a European centre, reference centre, which is very important. Interestingly, when I come to talk, people from different bits of government send in slides and say, you might find this useful. And I found this one really interesting. So while it's not totally relevant, I thought you'd be fascinated. Did you know at Porton Down, they've now built a mock ward where they can try out putting in either inoculations into the wastewater or just running stuff through and seeing where it contaminates, how it transmits in this model ward and everything. So I'm going to get them at some point to bring in some infected food and see how it transmits around that system as well, because we all know that food is often mishandled when it's advised not. We also have a much smaller fund, but very useful, called the Global AMR Innovation Fund, funding work alongside Canada around the place. Food algae, I don't know about that one. I know about the environmental stuff there. Quorum quenchers, that's how bacteria talk to each other, quorum sensing. And of course, because I'm into fish farming, I'm very into fish jacuzzis, as the team call them. Fish jacuzzis turn out to be nano bubbles of oxygen bubbled through, and the early data is looking quite hopeful that that will reduce bacterial growth and infection. So, all of us are doing a lot. Have we managed to get the public with us? Well, frankly, not enough. Is it because I call it AMR? I often talk to the public about superbugs. Is it because it's so silent? What is it we've done wrong? So in Edinburgh, this wonderful young man, Robin, has written a musical called The Mould That Changed the World, about Fleming. It played to a sellout audience. I don't know whether you went in the Edinburgh Festival in 2019. It's been there again a couple of years ago. We've had it sell out in 6 nights in Washington, 6 nights in Atlanta, where the US CDC is. And it is great fun. I was skeptical until I saw it. I was sent out to raise money for them, and I had not seen it. And it has soloists who are professional, very Scottish, Fleming, and then draws in as the chorus people, science teachers, lab people, nurses, doctors, whatever, and it's really great fun. And they did a pop-up, I missed it, in Parliament Square. I was so pissed off I missed it, which was fun. I'm trying to raise money. Well, we've raised enough that we've rented a theatre in New York for 6 weeks over the high-level meeting. I've got to raise the rest of the money, and I'm trying to persuade the United Nations to have a first, and during lunch of the one-day high-level meeting, normally people go out and the chamber is silent, and I've said, can't we have them in doing some of the songs and people can come and go, because lunch doesn't, you can do lunch in 10 minutes and then come back and listen to this. But it is a way of galvanizing awareness. The other thing I thought I'd raise to you is, I've been at this rather a long time, and I've discovered that policy can achieve quite a lot, but to change politicians' minds, to get them to put policy in place, is a blooming uphill struggle, and that's why this sort of thing helps not only with the public, but the politicians. But the other way into lots of things is through investors or consumers. The Americans have a consumer chart on AMR about fast food places, and Chipotle and Shake Shack are at the top, and people do take it into account. They don't always. I'm the Master of Trinity College in Cambridge, the richest Oxbridge college. We have a big endowment. We have an AMR group of students. They decided they wanted to try doing activist investing, like students have done on climate change. They went to the McDonald's parent company, AGM, put down on our behalf a resolution, and if it's Trinity College, people notice it, saying, you've got to investigate your use of antibiotics, and they'd only got 12% of the votes. They said they would. So we're beginning to do that, and we have a group led by FAIR, who are wonderful, but involving us, Principles for Responsible Investment, and Access to Medicines Foundation, bringing together all of these investors about how to ask intensive farmers, fast food companies, how they're using antibiotics and try and change it. Meanwhile, through Cambridge University, I've come across another group of investors who are even more important. $75 trillion worth. This lot are worth 13 trillion. $75 trillion, a group who call themselves universal owners. So let me try and explain what a universal owner is. They're people like pension funds who buy into companies, and they're going to be there for a very long time. So they want to invest for profit and growth, but they don't want to do damage to the long term because they're going to be there in a long term. So let's take tobacco. They don't want the high income that tobacco gives you because downstream they'd cop all the costs of health and lack of productivity due to tobacco. That's a universal owner. So I was asked to go and do an after-dinner speech. I hate doing those because I don't think, I can be funny, but not usually intentionally. So I went and I talked about AMR. And then the next year at their meeting, they said, come and speak at the session. So I went and did AMR. Last year, they said, we're going to give you a 2-hour session. So I did. And at the end, one of them stood up and said, we are going to start asking the companies we own parts of to do something about AMR. And they've developed what they call guardrails. I think I'd have called them guidelines, but guardrails is the word of the moment, folks, if you haven't come across it. It's fun, you know, keeping up with, one of my colleagues calls it the bingo game of management. So the bingo word of the moment is guardrails, and they've got them. So this 80 trillion of investment are now beginning to ask companies who are doing intensive farming around the world and fast food companies, and then I want them to do big supermarket chains, questions about growth promotion, questions about what they do with antibiotics and metaphylaxis, prophylaxis on the way. So it's a really interesting way of influencing that I think might be bigger than policy. We've been working, well, I haven't, but we the Brits, through the British Standards Institute, which turns out to be it is British, but it's global, and they have a big branch in India on minimising the risk of antimicrobial resistance kite mark for effluent from factories. That's gone live, so we're hoping we can get people to take it up. And doing lots of other things. So one other thing I've done is in 2020 during COVID, I was no longer CMO, thankfully. I escaped, that lot. It was worse than I realised. But I felt that many were not governments, ours included, but around the world, were not using all the data that they should use. Everyone was using rather lousy health hospital data. They weren't using movement data that you could get, all sorts of things. So I raised £7.5 million. I launched something we call the Trinity Challenge and ran a challenge across the world. Who can give us tools for collecting and using data better to diagnose, prevent, diagnose, manage or recover from pandemics better? The trinitychallenge.org website. Fabulous stuff came in. We gave 8 prizes and they're all doing really well. Well, we've just this week, World Antibiotic Awareness Week, or was that last week? Anyway, now launched a new challenge, and I've got 2 million so far in the prize pot for AMR, One Health, how to collect data better or use data better, One Health, so animals, some of you may have contacts in low and middle income countries, and not hospital data. We're saying we don't want hospital data, people should collect that, but what about data about how people live with animals and what that does? I don't know, but all sorts of things. So if you're interested in that, then please do have a look at the website, thetrinitychallenge.org. But that's one of my sidelines, which keeps me out of trouble. Clearly, we're only going to get it to happen when you all do what you're doing and up the game and get the people who aren't in this room. I bet all of you, because you're in this room, are pretty good at this. The ones that aren't here are the ones we need to get. How do we get them? What can you do? We're doing quite a lot. I've talked about some of it. We're funding a new global economics studies because pounds talk or dollars talk. We're looking at how we can galvanise youth and see what we can do there. I'm working with the Union Internationale of Cancer Care about how some cancer patients could become ambassadors, because 1 in 5 cancer patients ends up in hospital with a severe infection. And so most novel treatments and better treatments make people more prone to infection. So if we don't sort AMR, cancer treatments and modern medicine as a whole are going out of the window. Wednesday, the BBC are showing doing the premiere of a new film, Race Against Resistance, but it's actually on YouTube, and if you've never seen Trinity College, you can look at that and you'll see Trinity College. So we're doing all sorts of things. Meanwhile, as I said, the high-level meetings where we're on our way to, I've mentioned the World Economic Forum. Europe is a big leader, and the Swedish EU presidency, I was wearing this top in September. I started the day in a different top, but I dribbled coffee down it over breakfast. And the friend who was having breakfast said, Sally, you can't go and give a talk in that top. So there you are. I'll have to check that more, won't I? Doing lots of work, and I'm very happy to answer questions about it. And I think I have one more slide. Yeah, you have a high-level meeting. If you want something to happen, you've got to decide what you want. Because most people want stuff that isn't achievable. And that just gets in the way. So I've spent quite a lot of time asking what we want round the place. What I want, so almost by definition what the British government wants, but don't tell them that, but it would be difficult to stop me, is I want us to have some targets. And I think those targets should come from ones that are already out there from the UN agencies, because then we've got the concept of targets, and those who aren't at the levels that you are will come up to those levels. Once we've got the concept of targets, we can then ratchet them up a bit. So we haven't got where we need to yet. I want, and I've made a thing about that, a science panel. I want us to kickstart innovation. I think we need pull incentives really putting in place. And we need a new accountability framework where countries can, like climate, sign up and say, this is where I am, this is where I'm going to over the next 3 years, and I'll come back to a COP or some mechanism like this and tell you where I've got to and what the problems are. But it also gives a mechanism to say, and I can't afford to do it unless you help me, because actually this does need some support and help. So, I think I've gone through everything I wanted to say. We clearly, all sectors, do need to remember One Health. What we do impacts on each other and need to learn from each other. So, you know, small animal vets can learn from humans by saying to people, you know, this is a viral infection, antibiotics don't work. Small animal people might like to say, because there's a randomized controlled trial that it works with children, your little cat, I like cats, your little cat doesn't look as if it's going to need, and it's probably a he or a her, but even babies were it to me, doesn't look as if it needs antibiotics, but here's a delayed prescription, you can pick it up if in 36 hours it's not so bad. Meanwhile, I hear that we learnt from your sector with a kind of prescription pad that wasn't for antibiotics, which was much more behavioural. And in the Northwest, they tried it out where they said, this is what we think it is, this is what we advise you do, and tore it off. Behavioural approach. And that worked quite well. I don't know why it didn't spread across the country, and I believe some of you were ahead of the human side doing that. We need to share what we're doing and talk about it in similar ways, because if you're saying to people with cats and dogs, come on, if that was your kid, you wouldn't get antibiotics for this from the GP. And the GP's saying, come on, you know, if your cat catches this from your kid, you won't need antibiotics either. Maybe we can make more progress together. But let me end there by saying thank you for all you've done, and please bring the laggards with you and keep making progress. So now I'm open to answering questions if anyone wants to. But you may know the answers better than me. So one there and then Liz over there.
Thank you. That was really, really fascinating. This is going to be slightly controversial and maybe really small fry at the same time. In the veterinary profession at the moment, you've talked a lot about animal nutrition, and I do quite a lot of nutrition stuff, and we have a big issue at the moment with people wanting to raw feed animals, hence the controversy, sorry. But
raw feed.
yeah, so people want to, dogs are wolves, therefore we're going to feed them raw chicken, which to me is the same as me saying my children used to be cavemen, therefore they do act like cavemen sometimes, but therefore I'm going to feed them raw chicken as well, which we would never do. So we have a big issue with people making mad decisions about food hygiene. And we know that we've got lots of veterinary studies that have showed that brucella and infections like that are coming back into countries where they weren't before. We have massive parasitic issues. You mentioned cancer patients. We know that the shedding of E. coli and Salmonella and Campylobacter into the environment, even if the animals don't show clinical signs, is a huge public health risk. And maybe from our point of view as vets, it would be nice. You also mentioned the collaborative work. I think that the medical profession and the veterinary profession should work much more together. It would be great if we could, I'm on the board of the fellowship, and when we talked about you coming to speak here, we were saying, well, hang on, it would be really great if some of our amazing vets could speak at medical conferences, because we have stuff to offer as well. But I think with things like that, like the raw feeding issue, it would be lovely to get some medical backup, because it's a big issue for us, and it's a massive public health issue, and it's really on the rise. And it is small compared to some of the other things like aquaculture, but actually it is quite significant as well.
I think it is, from what you say. So I think you should talk to the chief scientist of the Food Standards Agency, because it cries out to have one of these kind of comms campaigns about it. You know, protect the vulnerable around you and your kids by making sure you don't overhandle animal food and you cook it. But so I don't know whether someone will pick it up with the FSA, but that's where I'd start on that one. Good one, yeah.
Yes, I would like to take up really from where the previous question came from. How best do you think the medical and veterinary professions should work together to address these problems? Do you think that there's a place in medical and veterinary schools for places on the curriculum where the one medicine problems should be talked about, raised, and taught seriously?
I absolutely do. Of course I do. Whether that'll make any difference is quite another matter. Let's be honest about it. I tried to get the General Medical Council to do various things about medical training and failed because they claimed they knew better than me. I was never sure they did, really. But one of the things I was suggesting to the President was that the President might approach the Academy of Medical Royal Colleges and start to have a dialogue at that level and see whether you can start to share on One Health things around that and everything. But absolutely. I mean, if we should be training doctors with nurses, then we should be training pharmacists and doctors with vets.
Hi. Drugs don't work, quite clearly.
I wrote a book called that some years ago.
There's a few songs. Given the success we've had with COVID viruses and with suppression of the cases of cervical cancer in women, I didn't hear much in your presentation about potential for vaccines as opposed to just more drugs.
Fantastic, thank you. I couldn't have asked for a better question. I mentioned it in salmon, but I mean, I think that the sky's the limit, and the problem is twofold. One, can we make them? I'm told by people who are expert on mRNA vaccines they can make them for bacteria and everything. And then how do we get the cost to be such that in the food chain people will want to use them? So we've got those two things to battle with, but that doesn't mean we can't and we won't get there. I think vaccines are a good way to go for humans and animals, and we need more of them. Yep.
Thank you very much. I wonder, in these discussions you're having, how much emphasis is there on the move away from animal food production generally? You know, how much is that part of the discussion you're having?
Well, I, of course, bring it in and say, you know, the people who have access to meat in general eat far too much for their human health and obesity, so what meat we produce would go much further. But it isn't really a big discussion point, trying to get everyone to go vegetarian or whatever. It's people like me who have an interest in the other side of human health, or the other parts of human health, who say, hang on a minute, we don't want to be producing so much animal protein that people eat as much as some of the rich countries do. Big issue there. And it did take me a while to understand that happy or content animals have better immune systems and fewer infections. So animal welfare is at the bottom of a lot of this. It took me a while.
Thank you, Dame Sally. I love the championing you've done of international organisations and institutions. How concerned or confident are you about the strength of those international organisations at the moment?
Are you streaming this? No. Well, clearly we'll follow up over a cup of tea. I think that they're all, WHO and FAO are doing their best, but politics come into play in both of those in a big way. Whereas I have vast amounts of time for WOA, who I think really, and that is actually a veterinary association. They are approaching this very seriously and doing their very best and have made great strides. They're much less political, much more professional, so perhaps I can see why they're more committed and make more of a difference. When the politics comes in, it can be quite difficult. And I'm well known for going and telling politicians from other countries off, ministers, and saying, you know, let me just look up your data. This is the number of people that die in your country, and you're doing this, and come on. This isn't on. Because what's the worst that can happen to me? The government sacks me from an unpaid post as a special envoy. I mean, come on, my husband would welcome it. At least I think he would.
Thanks for the talk, Dame Sally. It's a lesson in tenacity, I think. My name is Ellie West. I'm an environmental sustainability lead for a corporate group, and I see everything through a planet lens. So when I'm trying to get buy-in for AMR, I see it through the lever as a carbon reduction measure, and as a way to reduce environmental pollution, which is something which is very popular for people to be concerned about and to think about, rather than framing it as a one health issue, which to a lot of people doesn't have meaning, or to a risk of antibiotic infection, which again feels like it's far off until you have it. Could we be levering it as a carbon reduction method with the Climate Change Committee, or indeed with the environmental pollution due to the concerns with wastewater effluent, which we have at the moment, to get that buy-in from the public?
So I'm beginning to get there on the environment, as you heard me talking about rain and rivers and things, and standards for environmental pollution. I need someone to give me more tutoring on how to do better on it, if I'm honest about it. I started off as a human doc, as it were, and I've kind of gone into all sorts of things, and people have to help me.
Dame Sally, thank you very much. That was really inspiring talk to see what's going on around the world. I'm Fiona Love, one of the clinical leads for medicine for RCVS Knowledge. I'm quite sure in the room we don't have any laggards, but I'm quite sure everybody in the room does know someone that they have influence on, a friend, someone in their practice team who might value the resources. I have a number of drinks mats in my bag with a QR code accessing amazing resources, farm animal, companion animal, equine resources that RCVS Knowledge have put together, and I'd really love to give away my drinks mats. If anyone wants to take one, give them to a friend and access the resources.
Fab. Stand up, Fiona, so they all know who you are if you didn't. Thank you. I agree. I talked about small animals. It took me so long to understand what companion animals were. Pets to me, but there we are. Yeah.
Thank you very much indeed for an excellent presentation. I just want to pick up on what Emma said about working more together between the human medical field and the veterinary medical field, and how much we can learn from each other. And I just want to pick on what you just said then about that it took you a while to understand about the fact that welfare was, you know, at the crux of all of this, and that if you're in a poor emotional state, that affects your immune system. And I think it's a massive plea for the discipline of behavioural medicine in veterinary medicine, the biopsychosocial approach from the human medical field. The two things are just so mirroring of each other, and hopefully this is a point where we can all work together to understand that health has these three important components which you can't neglect at any level if you want to have this overall effect. And this is obviously a massively important thing that you're talking about here, but it's actually all linked. You know, we talk glibly about One Health. So yes, can we have more collaborative work between the two professions?
Thank you.
Sally, as others have said, thank you for a very interesting and inspiring talk. I'm Professor David Barrett from the University of Bristol, and I and a number of other co-authors in the One Health sphere published a paper about 4 years ago on the concept of an antibiotic footprint. And we've touched on carbon footprints, and everyone in the room knows at least what the concept of a carbon footprint is. And I wonder, through the high-level meetings that you're involved in, has there been any discussion about taking forward this idea of an antibiotic footprint? Thank you.
Thank you, and I do remember it. And I like it. The trouble is it's a bit complex. And maybe carbon footprints are complex, but if we're going to get much out of the high-level meeting, it's going to have to be terribly simple. And I fear that may not be. I mean, it is no secret that when I went to see David Cameron about AMR, I had 20 minutes and I ended up staying 45 because I had to explain what antibiotics were and how they infected and what AMR was and why it mattered. And then he became fantastically supportive and has said he's going to go on supporting. Now he's come back in as Foreign Secretary, which is fantastic. But it does, when you get to these grand political moments, need simplifying. But keep up the good work. Maybe we can get something like that, a version to stick at some point. I think they're done. Thank you very much.
Thank you.